The grand hall of Shadowspire Castle gleamed under hundreds of flickering candles. Crimson banners swayed gently as a draft passed through the towering windows, and the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine filled the air. Nobles in rich silks and heavy cloaks mingled, exchanging whispers and polite bows. Tonight was a feast unlike any other, a night where alliances could be forged with a word, a glance, or a dance. And for Alara, it was a night of quiet terror. She moved carefully among the guests, her hands folded in front of her, a delicate mask of composure hiding the racing thoughts within. Her father had insisted she attend, claiming that a marriage arranged at the feast could secure her family's future. But Alara's heart rebelled against the idea of being claimed like an object, her life dictated by the whims of others. She had no intention of bowing to fate so easily. Above the din of conversation and laughter, she noticed him. He stood near the far end of the hall, tall and unyielding, like a statue carved from shadow and moonlight. His eyes were sharp, commanding attention without a word. The courtiers whispered that he was the Alpha King, a man who ruled not just by title but by an aura of undeniable power. Many claimed he had mated only with those worthy of both courage and mind, and his judgment was said to be merciless. Alara shivered, not from cold, but from the realization that she had just brushed against the edge of destiny without even knowing it. She took a careful step back, hiding behind a cluster of nobles, hoping to avoid his notice. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A royal advisor approached her, moving with the smooth confidence of someone used to bending others to his will. "Alara," he said, his voice low and measured, "the king has taken interest. You must meet him. It would be wise to comply." Her stomach twisted at his words. Compliance was a word that tasted like chains on her tongue. I am honored," she managed, her voice steady despite the panic fluttering inside her. The advisor's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Good, follow me." Alara felt the walls of the hall closing in. Every noble she passed seemed to stare, their gazes sharp and assessing. Her mind raced. How could she avoid this without bringing shame upon herself? Then a desperate idea struck her. If she fainted, she could escape their notice, at least for a moment. It was risky, but it was the only plan she could summon. She forced herself to smile lightly, taking slow, steady breaths as she prepared for the ruse. As the advisor drew closer, she let her knees buckle slightly, letting herself collapse forward. But instead of hitting the cold stone floor, strong hands caught her. Her eyes fluttered open and she froze. The stranger holding her was taller than any man she had ever seen, his presence almost suffocating in its intensity. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, deep and unreadable, yet piercing through her very thoughts. "You dare to faint in my arms?" His voice was calm, yet carried an edge that made the hall feel smaller, as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Alara's heart pounded wildly. She tried to pull away, but his grip was steady, unyielding. She realized with a sudden jolt that this was no ordinary man. This was the Alpha King himself, the one whispered about in fearful tones by every noble present. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, yet she could not look away from those stormy eyes. I am sorry," she stammered, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I did not mean to." He tilted his head slightly, studying her as though weighing her very soul. Then, to her surprise, a faint, almost amused smile curved his lips. "You are clever," he said softly, almost a whisper. "Not many would dare such a thing before me." The hall had grown quiet. Nobles paused in mid-conversation, noticing the tension radiating from the king and the fainting girl in his arms. Whispers rippled through the room like a sudden gust of wind. Alara's mind raced. She had to get away before they realized who she truly was, or before the king demanded an explanation she could not give. She tried again to pull back, her voice firm despite the fear. "Please, let me go." For a moment he did not move. Then with a slow, deliberate gesture, he lowered her to the floor, but did not release her entirely, his hands remaining near her, ready to catch her if she fell again. His gaze never wavered. "Not so fast," he said, his tone gentle but commanding. "I wish to know why a woman would pretend to be so fragile, only to act so defiant in my presence." Alara swallowed hard. She wanted to vanish into the shadows, to run, to hide, but there was no escape. The eyes of the Alpha King were locked onto hers, and something deep inside her told her that this was a moment that could not be undone. She began, but words failed her. How could she explain that she had fainted merely to avoid being mated? To keep her life and freedom intact? It sounded foolish and weak. The king's gaze softened just slightly, though the storm in his eyes did not fade. "I see," he murmured, almost to himself. Then his attention shifted, scanning the hall. "Do not fear, little one," he said quietly. "I am not quick to anger, and not all chains are visible." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. His words were strange, comforting, yet layered with unspoken power. She realized that the king, for all his fearsome reputation, had not yet condemned her. Instead, he seemed intrigued, curious about the fire she tried to hide beneath her calm exterior. A hush settled over the hall. The nobles and guests, sensing something unusual, held their collective breath. Ilara felt the weight of every gaze upon her, every whisper sharpening like knives. Yet the king's presence overshadowed all else, as if his power alone could bend the room to his will. "You will not escape attention so easily," he said finally, stepping closer yet keeping a measured distance. "Tell me, little fox, do you always play such dangerous games?" Ilara's cheeks burned with heat. She wanted to flee, to apologize, to vanish into thin air. But something in his gaze held her there, daring her to be honest, daring her to stand tall despite fear. I only wish to choose my own path," she admitted softly, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I do not wish to be claimed without a choice." The king's eyes darkened and the faint smile disappeared. He regarded her seriously now, his expression unreadable. "A bold answer," he said. "Few have the courage to speak so freely in my presence." Ilara's chest tightened. Courage was easier in thought than in practice, and now that she had spoken, she feared the consequences. Yet at the same time there was a strange thrill, a spark that whispered she had not failed entirely. She had spoken her truth and he had listened. The hall erupted once more in muted whispers, nobles exchanging looks of surprise and curiosity. The king's attention, however, remained fixed on her. He bent slightly, his voice low, carrying only for her ears. "Mark my words," he said, a hint of promise and warning intertwined. "Your defiance will not be forgotten. Tonight you have drawn my interest and with it the weight of my attention." Ilara's heart raced. She understood in that instant that her simple act of fainting had placed her in the center of a storm she did not yet fully understand. Fear mingled with fascination, dread mingled with a strange sense of destiny. As the king straightened and returned his gaze to the crowd, the hall slowly resumed its festivities. Yet for Ilara the noise seemed distant, almost unreal. Her mind replayed the moments in his arms, the intensity of his eyes, the weight of unspoken power. She forced herself to breathe, to calm her racing heart, to think of a way to survive the night. But deep down she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The Alpha King had seen her defiance, and she had seen the storm that lay beneath his calm exterior. And somewhere in the shadows of the hall, a quiet, unyielding thought took root in her mind. She had fallen into his power, and there was no turning back. The next morning, Shadowspire Castle seemed quieter, though the walls still hummed with whispers from the feast. Courtiers moved with careful steps, glances sharp as knives. Ilara walked through the corridors with a measured pace, her mind still tangled with the events of the previous night. She could not erase the image of the Alpha King holding her, the way his eyes had pierced through every layer of her pretense. Yet now, in daylight, the fear returned. She had drawn attention, not only from the king but from the entire court. Every step she took seemed shadowed by the knowledge that the king's gaze could follow her anywhere. She had no idea how to navigate the power that hung so heavily in the air. In the grand courtyard she paused near a fountain, letting the sunlight warm her skin. The water sparkled, but her thoughts were restless, circling back to the king's voice, calm yet commanding when he had whispered, "Your defiance will not be forgotten." She shivered at the memory. That single line had been both a warning and a promise, and she had no idea which it was meant to be. She did not notice the shadow approaching until it moved past her. He was there as always, quiet but commanding. The Alpha King's presence made the courtyard feel smaller, more dangerous. Yet there was a strange allure she could not deny. "You seem restless," he said, his voice low and even. "Do you regret your little act of defiance?" Ilara looked up, meeting his stormy eyes. Her heart beat fast, but she forced a calmness into her voice. "I do not regret it. I only regret that my actions may have caused you offense." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a slight smile curved his lips, softening the harshness of his features. "No offense," he said. "I find courage interesting. Few possess it, and fewer still dare to show it when it could endanger them." Elara swallowed, unsure whether to feel relieved or more frightened. You are not angry with me?" she asked quietly. "Anger is a simple emotion," he replied. "I deal in balance and understanding. Strength and cunning matter far more than compliance." The words unsettled her. He spoke like a king who held the world in his hands, a man whose judgment could shift the course of life itself. And yet there was something more beneath the authority. A quiet respect, perhaps, for the very act that most would consider foolish. "Why? Why do you speak to me this way?" she asked, curiosity and caution mingling in her tone. "Because," he said, stepping closer, his shadow falling across the fountain's edge. "Few people in this world meet me with honesty. You do not pretend, you do not cower. That is rare." Elara's chest tightened. Rare. She did not fully understand the weight of that word, but she felt it like a hand pressing gently against her heart. She wanted to speak, to tell him she was not trying to impress him only to survive the feast, but her words froze on her lips. "Tell me," he continued, "why do you fear the mating customs? Why would you go to such lengths to avoid them?" Her heart raced. Could she trust him enough to answer? She risked exposure, yet something in his tone demanded honesty. I wish to choose my own path," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not want my life dictated by tradition or by others' desires." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less. "A rare spirit," he said again. "You are braver than you know, Elara." Her pulse quickened at the sound of her name on his lips. Somehow the king knew her name, though they had only met through circumstance. She wanted to turn away, to flee, yet something rooted her to the spot, a mixture of fear and fascination. Suddenly, movement in the shadows drew her attention. A group of nobles lingered near the edge of the courtyard, whispering urgently among themselves. Her stomach clenched. They were plotting, she realized, though she could not yet discern the nature of their scheme. "The court is restless," she said carefully. "I think someone may be planning against me." He followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "You're right," he said. "There are those who resent what they cannot control. Those who would see you used or discarded. But fear not. You are under my protection now, whether you realize it or not." Elara's breath caught. Protection. The word was both comforting and terrifying. She had never known a life where someone like the king would care for her choice, her safety or her freedom. And yet there was an unspoken truth in his tone that made her feel both seen and exposed. "Why protect me?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. "I am no one of consequence to you." "You underestimate yourself," he replied. "Cleverness, courage, defiance, these are rare. You are far more remarkable than you realize. That is why I watch you, and why I will not allow harm to come to you." Her heart pounded at the sincerity in his words. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine a world where she was not merely a pawn, where someone powerful could see her strength rather than just her vulnerability. The king gestured toward the castle. "Come, you will not remain safe alone in the courtyard." She followed him through the shadowed corridors, the quiet of the castle both comforting and intimidating. Every step seemed to echo, and yet the storm of emotions inside her drowned out the sound of her own footsteps. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he judged her, whether he admired her defiance, or whether he simply saw her as a puzzle to solve. They reached a private chamber, small but richly adorned with tapestries and the scent of aged wood. The king gestured for her to sit. "Rest," he said. "You have survived the first trial of the feast, but there will be more challenges. The court does not forgive defiance lightly, nor does it allow women to escape the eyes of power. You must be prepared." Elara sank into the chair, the weight of the night and the morning pressing on her shoulders. "And if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You will not fail," he said firmly. "Not while I am aware of you. But you must understand that survival here demands more than courage. It demands cleverness and the ability to act without fear." She nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of his words. Her defiance had drawn his attention, yes, but it had also placed her in a position of danger she could not yet measure. And yet, despite the fear, there was a thrill she could not deny. To stand in the presence of the Alpha King and not falter was both terrifying and intoxicating. For the first time, Ilara felt something she had never felt before, the recognition that she was not powerless. She had acted, however, foolishly, and the king had noticed. The realization both bolstered her courage and reminded her of the delicate balance she must maintain. The king studied her, his expression inscrutable. "Tonight," he said softly, "you have made a choice. It may not seem like much, but it marks you. Few have dared to meet me so directly and survive with their wits intact. Remember that, Ilara. Remember who you are and who watches you." Her pulse quickened at the implication. To be watched by him was no small thing. It was both a privilege and a warning. The court would not remain silent, the nobles would plot, and yet she sensed a strange alliance forming between them, born of mutual respect and quiet intrigue. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. A servant entered, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, news from the Eastern Gate. A group of nobles seeks an audience with you, and they speak ill of Lady Ilara." The king's expression hardened. "Leave them," he said to the servant, then turned to her, his eyes darkening. "See, danger follows you already. The court does not forgive, and the ambitious will test every boundary. But do not fear. You will not face it alone." Ilara's heart raced. The reality of her situation settled heavily upon her. She had survived the feast, survived the fainting, and yet the challenges were only beginning. She could no longer retreat from the consequences of her defiance. And all the while the Alpha King watched her, his attention both shield and weight. She realized with a mix of dread and anticipation that she was caught in a world larger than she had ever imagined, where power, choice, and desire collided. And at the center of it all was the man who had caught her when she fell, the man whose eyes had seen through her pretense, and whose presence now shaped her every step. The evening descended on Shadowspire Castle with a heavy cloak of clouds, casting long shadows over the towers and courtyards. A storm was brewing outside, the wind rattling windows and carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder. Inside, the castle's corridors were lit by flickering torches, their flames casting dancing shadows that seemed to echo the tension in the air. Ilara moved carefully, each step measured, every sense alert. She knew the nobles who resented her were gathering strength, whispering plots and alliances in hidden corners. Their ambition was sharp, and they would not forgive the defiance she had shown at the feast. Every moment carried the risk of exposure, betrayal, or worse, and yet despite the danger she felt a strange clarity, a courage she had never known before. She had survived the feast, she had faced the Alpha King, and now she understood that survival required both wit and courage. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her chest, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the faintest thrill. And then, as if drawn by fate, he appeared, the Alpha King himself, his presence cutting through the shadows like a sword of moonlight. He did not speak at first. He simply observed, his eyes scanning her with that piercing intensity that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter. "Ilara," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "The time has come. They have acted sooner than I expected." Her stomach clenched. "Acted? What do you mean?" "They believe you are weak, that you will bend to their schemes," he replied. "They have planned to remove you from this place, to force a union, one that benefits them, not you." Fear surged, but it was tempered by the knowledge that he was near. What will happen?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You will not be taken," he said firmly. "But you must trust me, as I will trust you." Before she could respond, the sounds of hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. A group of nobles, masked in shadows and ambition, moved swiftly, intent clear in their eyes. Ilara felt her pulse quicken, but she did not falter. She had faced fear before, and she would do so again. The Alpha King stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice cutting through the tension like steel. "Halt!" he commanded. The nobles froze, startled by the authority in his tone. They had underestimated him and underestimated her. "Step aside," he said to them. "You will not touch her." The nobles hesitated, and in that moment Ilara realized that she no longer felt like a victim. The fear that had haunted her at the feast had shifted into something stronger, the courage to act, the clarity to move with purpose. She stepped beside the king, her heart steady, and met the noble's gaze without flinching. "You underestimate her," the king said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "She is clever, strong, and defiant. She is no pawn. Alara felt a warmth in his words, a recognition she had longed for. She nodded slightly, silently acknowledging that she would not falter. Not now, not ever. The nobles, sensing the shift in power, hesitated further, their confidence faltering. The king moved swiftly, his presence a shield around her. "Leave now," he said, voice like thunder. "Your schemes have failed." The nobles retreated, murmuring threats and curses that fell harmlessly into the air. Alara watched them go, her chest still pounding, but a sense of relief washing over her. She had survived the first true test of the court's ambitions, and she had done so with the king at her side. When the hall was empty again, the king turned to her, his stormy eyes softening. "You did well," he said. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, but the strength to face it." Alara swallowed, her voice trembling with the mix of exhaustion and emotion. I could not have done it alone." He stepped closer, the space between them charged with an intensity neither could deny. "No one faces the world alone," he said quietly. "And now you must understand something important. The bond between us is not just of survival. It is built on trust, respect, and the choices we make together." Her heart skipped a beat. She had feared being claimed, feared losing control over her own life. And yet standing here with him, she realized that he offered something different. Not chains or obligation, but partnership. The realization filled her with a mixture of relief, hope, and a new kind of longing. I do not fully understand," she admitted. "But I want to try. I want to learn what this bond means." He nodded, a small approving smile on his lips. "Then we will face it together," he said. "But know this. The court will test us, the world will test us, and there are shadows yet unseen. Only together can we endure." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows, lightning illuminating the towering walls of the castle. In that moment, Alara felt the weight of the challenges ahead, yet also the strength of the connection that had formed between them. It was not love, not yet, but something deeper, a recognition of courage, of resilience, and of mutual understanding. Hours passed in quiet conversation, the king revealing pieces of the court's secrets, the plots that had been whispered behind closed doors, and the dangers that lurked beyond the castle walls. Alara listened, absorbing each word, realizing that knowledge was a weapon as powerful as any sword. She asked questions, offered insights, and found that her cleverness was not only acknowledged but valued. "You think too highly of me," she said at one point, a faint smile crossing her lips. "On the contrary," he replied, his eyes gleaming with respect. "You see the world with sharp eyes and a brave heart. That is exactly why I noticed you." Her cheeks warmed at the praise, though she kept her composure. She was learning, slowly, that courage and intelligence could earn her a place even in the dangerous halls of Shadowspire. And in the presence of the king, she found that her fears were tempered by admiration, and something unspoken that stirred within her heart. Later, as the storm subsided and the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the king led her to a balcony overlooking the castle grounds. The rain had washed the stone clean, and the world looked both renewed and treacherous, a reflection of their own journey. "Alara," he said softly, "tonight you have faced danger, defiance, and choice, and you have done so with a spirit few possess. Remember this: power is not given freely, nor is trust, but you have earned both my attention and my respect." She met his gaze, her own eyes wide with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. I will not forget," she said. "And I will not fail." He reached out, a gentle gesture that carried the weight of promise. "I believe in you," he said, "and I will be here, as both shield and companion as you navigate what is to come." Ilara's heart swelled with an unfamiliar feeling. Confidence, yes, but also something deeper. She realized that she no longer wished to simply survive. She wanted to stand, to act, to be seen not as a fragile pawn but as someone who could shape her destiny alongside the king. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the wind brushing against their faces, the storm behind them fading into memory. The castle seemed quieter now, but she knew the court's intrigues were far from over. Yet with him at her side, she felt a new strength, a new resolve. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "For seeing me, for protecting me." He inclined his head, his gaze soft but unwavering. "I have not merely seen you," he said. "I have recognized you. That is far more important." As the sun rose higher, casting golden light over the castle towers, Alara realized that she had changed. The girl who had fainted in the king's arms was no longer helpless. She had faced fear, confronted ambition, and found the courage to stand beside power itself. And the Alpha King, for all his strength and authority, had acknowledged her not as a subject but as a partner in the trials to come.